everyone, Gaara here and welcome to the second episode of Worst Designed Hearthstone Cards. Without further ado, let's get right into it. In today's episode, I want to talk about Innervate. I want to dissect this card and show you guys why the design of Innervate is bad and why it's unhealthy for the game and why this card has to be changed. So that you guys understand why Innervate is bad for the game, or why the design of Innervate ultimately will fail, not just right now but also in the future with more upcoming expansion. I'm gonna show you with the aid of the evolution of the minions that we innovate out in the early game and how they have changed over the course of the years. In the very beginning of the game, when Innervate was created, as you guys can see, Innervate is a basic card, so this card was created before Alpha. I think this really limits the design space for the Druid class in general, because the more powerful the minion you design, the more busted Innervate is. And in the very beginning of the game, all we had in terms of ramp effects were Nourish and Wild Growth and Innervate. And most of the minions that were played were cards like Chill Vignette. With this first example, I want to focus on the early game minions that you play mostly. It's between 3 mana and 5 mana, because 3 mana minions you can play on turn 1, like the Shifting Shade back in the days, but I didn't bring that up. This is just a rough example of very common minions that you have played over the years, up to 5 mana. So the Chill Vignette was a very popular minion in the very beginning of Hearthstone, and it was a very common minion that you innovated out on turn 2. It is very powerful, and what is there to say? If you innovate out a Yeti, it's very hard to answer it, but what it does is it still gives your opponent time. Let's say you have a Vorax as warrior, you can hit it twice and you will take 12 phase damage. It was a big problem back in the days because Force of Nature Savage Roar became a problem and a staple in many Druid win conditions and just the way how Druid was played mostly. Nonetheless, after you answer it, you were usually like fine for a while. You can also then start playing taunts or regenerate health. The thing is, playing an innovated Yeti is a huge tempo generation and it's a powerful minion, but once you dealt with it, you dealt with it. You move on to the Piloted Shredder, it became harder to get rid of the minions that you innovated out. If you compare the Innovate Piloted Shredder play compared to the Yeti, it is suddenly 2 bodies, but the pressure is very similar. If you Vorax the Piloted Shredder main body and then the opponent attacks with the 2-drop and then you still have to Vorax it again, it's very similar in terms of damage to kill the Chill Vignette, but it is way more flexible to remove the Chill Vignette, because you can technically just execute it, Shield Slam it, Deadly Shot it, you name it. In comparison, to remove a Piloted Shredder is way harder. You're not going to use naturally an Execute, for example, for a Piloted Shredder, because you want to use your weapons. You can still deal with it, but as you guys can see, it becomes harder to remove the minion. Very similar to the Chill Vignette, your opponent is investing 2 cards in a huge tempo play, and after you dealt with the Piloted Shredder and the second body, you're still kind of fine, because you usually use like 1 or 2 resources for it. If you have a weapon, you use 1 resources. You basically traded a lot of life in just taking out the Piloted Shredder, but once you dealt with it, you're usually like fine for a while. And what has changed? Obviously, it became harder and harder to deal with the minions that get innovated out. With the Shredder, there was like a huge RNG aspect to it. For example, you could get a Haunted Creeper out of it, or like the Millhouse Mana Storm, then you would just lose to RNG. That was added on top of it, which was really bad. But sometimes you lost because you got a Doomsayer, for example, out of the Shredder. So that aspect was randomly added to it, which was super bad. It still felt like you can deal with the threat, and after you dealt with it, the game is still progressing like natural, except there comes like another Innovate follow-up play afterwards. And with the Fandral, there was another thing added to it. Killing a Fandral was very similar in terms of difficulty as killing a Chill Vignette. Now what got added to the game is the punish. If you can't kill a Fandral, there's a huge punish waiting for you. And usually, the way how Hearthstone works is new removal didn't get added to the game, or removal wasn't added in a balanced way to the game. So some classes randomly get new removal spells, like there was a quick shot added and a Glaizuka for Hunter, but then they rotated out and no new removal replaced those cards. Now we have, for example, the Viper shot, which is completely horrible and useless. This is like one of the reasons why Hunter, for example, is now the worst class and most unplayable class. As you guys can see, removing a Fenrir is as difficult as a Yeti. Usually you should not be able to remove it easily, but now there's a punish component. It gets harder and harder to deal with the minion that gets innovated out, but the punish is higher even on top of it. And we don't really got new tools to remove the cards that get innovated out. So Fenrir can punish you with Wrath, can punish you if you don't have a removal for it. You have to naturally play a minion that contests it, and then Wrath is punishing you hard. Nourish is the absolute punish. It is like game losing. If you innovate out a Fenrir and then you have like a Nourish follow-up, then how many times have you faced that scenario in a game where your opponent just nourished afterwards and then you basically can't concede? And the worst punish would be like a nourish and then with the 2 extra mana you use a Ref. It's just crazy, and there's just a lot of things that you can do with the Fenrir now with Malfurion. So over the course of the expansion we get more choose cards that work together with the Fenrir, so the punish gets higher. Fenrir is in the game for 2 years and new cards got added, like the new 2-drop, which gives you a Poisonous Spider or a Taunt Spider or Malfurion now. Like more cards that punish you if the Fenrir gets ignored or you just simply you have to ignore it. So you guys can see over the course of time the minions that get innovated out get more and more powerful and the punish gets harder. And now we have the Vicious Fledgling, which was a card that got added in Ungoro. If you innovate out a Vicious Fledgling on turn 1, the most popular deck that runs Vicious Fledgling is the Agro Druid. There's actually very few cards that can deal with a Vicious Fledgling on turn 1, but you have to address the Vicious Fledgling on turn 1. And this really makes me wonder what separates the Vicious Fledgling from an Undertaker pre-nerf when you think about it. Undertaker was a 1/2 minion that required 2 Death Rattle minion follow-ups, usually 2 1-drops, that buffed it to a 3/4. And Undertaker became broken once it was a 3/4. And that happened usually if it got ignored turn 1, and there's very few cards that can kill an Undertaker turn 1, and then you had a double Death Rattle follow-up, because as soon as you reach the sweet spot of 4 health, you couldn't deal with it because it's out of range of War Axe, you know, Eagle Hombo, all the Frostbolts and whatever you played back in the days. And Vicious Fledgling is even crazier. If you can't kill a Vicious Fledgling on turn 1, once it gets innovated out, the worst case scenario, your opponent hits a Wind Fury, and you hit a Wind Fury 30% of the time, then it starts to get crazy. You can attack in the same turn again, and then you're looking for cards like Stealth, Divine Shield, +3 health, even +1/+1 makes this card even harder to kill. So if you can't kill the Vicious Fledgling, the chance is very high that the opponent will just run away with the game without using any additional resources. But the deck where the Vicious Fledgling is played the most has a lot of support surrounding the Vicious Fledgling. As very similar to with the Fenrir, with newer expansions, more cards got released that support these broken plays. So the punish of Vicious Fledgling is even harder now, because now there is a 2 mana taunt that you can play in Druid, 1/5 taunt, the Druid class minion, or the Nerubian Lord that is a 3 mana 1/6 that gets buffed by whenever you play another minion, which protect the Vicious Fledgling. And you have the Mark of Visharash, you know, the Mark of Lotus, so the punish gets even more severe. And that has nothing to do with skill actually, it is just draw RNG. You happen to draw the Innervate plus Vicious Fledgling. It's very similar to just drawing the Undertaker and Death Rattle minions in your starting hand, and basically all you're hoping is play the Undertaker and the opponent doesn't have an answer, and then you go for the double 1-drop. Yeah, you just win the game because the opponent can't remove it anymore, and you will just go for a turn 5 lethal kill. Very similar to the Fledgling. The Fledgling actually kills you around turn 3 or turn 4, depending on your hand, if you have a lot of buffs, if you're lucky with the Wind Fury proc. Very similar scenario, and this really makes me wonder, because the Undertaker had to be nerfed. Blizzard knows the Undertaker Hunter meta was one of the unhealthiest meta in the game, and we have a very similar Druid popularity right now, even more than during the Hunter. And as you guys can see, with these cards that got added, Aggro Druid is a bigger problem right now than Jade Druid. But let me finish off this evolution of cards. Bitter-Tide Hydra, another card that is played in Aggro Druid. This is where things get crazy, because you cannot just have one Innervate in your starting hand, you can have two Innervates stack. You can technically play a Bitter-Tide Hydra on turn 1. And what kills a Bitter-Tide Hydra on turn 1? Nothing, absolutely nothing. It is very hard, it's impossible to punish a Bitter-Tide Hydra that comes out so early in the game. But even if you just innovate it out with one Innervate on turn 3, it is a 3 mana 8/8, and this card is not supposed to see play this early in the game just because there is no removal for it. Now that you finally understand why suddenly Innervate feels like such a broken card, after showing you the evolution of cards that get innovated out, I want to show you something interesting that happened on top of it. The removal cards have changed drastically as well. Not just that we get a very unbalanced amount of removal cards spread across the classes, a lot of the most popular or most commonly used removal cards got nerfed or changed. The cards that you can see here, the Mulch rotated out of the game, which was like the only remaining removal card for Druids, for example. Big Game Hunter got nerfed, and I heavily disagreed with that change, because the game was designed around having a BGH in the game, and Execute, Hunter's Mark, all these cards got nerfed. So as you guys can see, the minions that get innovated out become more and more difficult to remove. On top of it, the punish, if you don't remove them, is getting more and more severe, and on top of it, the removal cards we have in the game are getting nerfed or getting less. It doesn't make sense that Hearthstone is balanced in this weird way. It is essentially not balanced. I want to continue with the evolution of minions that we innovate out, but this time I want to go up in mana cost, like popular strong minions that we used to innovate out and how those have changed over the time. So we started off with, very similar to the Yeti, we used to play Boulder Fist Ogre in Druid, and yeah, it was a very powerful minion to innovate out, but very similar to the Yeti. Once you've killed it, you were usually fine for a while, or you got a resource advantage. And as you guys can see, very quickly it got out of control. Dr. Boom, one of the very first super broken cards that were just insane if you innovated it out. Again, if you had 2 copies of Innervate, you could play a Dr. Boom on turn 3. But then again, even though as broken as this sounds, back in the days we had a 3 mana BGH. So even if someone goes for double Innervate Dr. Boom play, you can still BGH it. Yes, he was left with the boom bots, and this is why Dr. Boom was so powerful, because of the boom bots, because there's like no super efficient way to trade with it 1-for-1, and this is like a very important note for the future that you keep in mind, that removal spells usually are becoming weak because they don't trade 1-for-1 anymore, but this is a topic for another video. So Dr. Boom, very powerful. I'm sorry, I actually had to switch them around because Ragnaros was before Dr. Boom. Double Innervate Ragnaros, obviously very powerful. As you guys can see, if you BGH a Ragnaros, it doesn't even matter if you double Innervate it out. You have to invest 3 cards and you can just counter punish him with just a BGH play. So this is how you kept the Innervate in check fairly easily. But as soon as Dr. Boom was released, you had the punish, even if you had the answer, right? Even if you had the BGH for the Dr. Boom, he could just trade the boom bots and then guarantee a kill on the BGH, which was like the perfect answer for it. But on top of it, with good RNG, you could deal up to 8 phase damage or just take out multiple other minions, and this is where things started to get out of control. Again, very similar as with the 4 mana cards. Emperor Torison. If you innervated out Emperor Torison, if you don't kill it immediately, the punish is insane. But now suddenly the damage is already dealt. As soon as you apply the Emperor Torison, you will guarantee the effect at least once. All the cards in your hand are already reduced by 1 mana, and so even if you kill him, you can potentially just follow up with other powerful cards because you already have the Emperor out. And if you didn't kill it, it was almost game over. Just the punish is too crazy. So as you guys can see, with Emperor Torison, Innervate became already a big problem, but not too many people have talked about Innervate back then. Now a lot of people talk about Innervate. We are slowly approaching a pinnacle of where Innervate is just completely out of control. I've showed you the early game cards for Aggro Druid that are innovated out right now, Vicious Fledgling and Beta Tide Hydra, which are like almost unkillable. Vicious Fledgling is on Undertaker level. If you don't kill it, you basically lose the game immediately. And for the control decks, Innervate out Malfurion is ridiculously powerful. Malfurion is one of the strongest Death Knight cards in the game and is a very powerful card on turn 7. But now with Wild Growth into Innervate, you can just get the Malfurion out on turn 3. Double Poisonous Spider out on turn 3 deals with any board against aggressive decks or control decks, and then you have a super hero power for the rest of the game. You get a nice armor boost of 5 armor for free essentially, and it's just super powerful. Ultimate Infestation. You don't play the Ultimate Infestation for 10 mana. You usually play it on turn 5, turn 6. It's just out of control. Some people play it on turn 4 if your hand is right. People just dump their hands because Ultimate Infestation will replenish all resources. It literally removes every skill aspect out of the game because you can just spam your cards. You can go up for like double Innervate Ultimate Infestation. And if you play Ultimate Infestation on turn 5, you can pretty much kill any minion that your opponent played, except he's his own druid. This is why so many people try to counter druid with their own druid. And then you establish a board, refresh your entire hand. You have the ramp already out usually by then. You have a full hand and you get armor on top of it. Like, where does it stop? And this is now where the problem begins. Like, where does it stop? Like, this expansion, Innervate will stay in the game forever. All the cards we've gotten over the last expansion became more and more powerful, and they become indirectly more powerful in Druid because you can just innervate them out. There's plenty more cards. I'm just naming you a few here. Lich King, for example. These cards are becoming faster. Lich King is faster than Ysera, they're more defensive, the cards you generate randomly are more powerful, and it's getting more and more out of control. And I just wanted to show you guys how things have changed. The same goes for the removal cards. As with the 4 mana cards or the early game minions, we are getting less and less removal cards, so it gets harder and harder to deal with these cards. And it doesn't make sense. It's completely not balanced around cards like Innervate. The classes are definitely not balanced around the natural progression of, for example, in this case, Innervate plus Big Minion. I wanted to compare Innervate to the most similar card in the game, Preparation, and why Preparation is not broken and is fine in the game for multiple reasons. So first of all, Rogue has gotten very few new powerful spells. Rogue does in fact have a lot of powerful spells, but they've gotten very few new spells. A main reason for that is definitely Preparation. The more powerful of a spell you would give to Rogue, the more powerful Preparation would become. You have seen, as soon as Blizzard has printed or designed a new spell, you immediately saw how broken Preparation was. And the last super powerful spell we have seen was the Quest. The Quest itself was already super powerful because it was way too easy to fulfill the requirements for it. And there you could see that they haven't playtested the Rogue Quest enough, else you would have seen very quickly that you could just fulfill the requirements for the quest very quickly. But where it became really problematic was prep out the quest, because then you had plenty of mana left to just flood the board with a lot of 1 mana minions that were essentially 5/5s. There you could see the power of Preparation, and you basically always have that in Innervate. And The biggest difference between Innervate and Preparation is, as I said, Rook has gotten very few powerful spells, so you never had a power increase of Preparation. We still preparate out cards like Eviscerate or Vanish or Fan of Nice, which we are doing since the beginning of time. But the problem with Innervate is you always will print powerful minions, and you have to print more and more powerful minions if you want to see people play the new cards instead of the classic cards and the cards from the old expansions. So Innervate will become more and more powerful in every expansion, and Preparation will stay about the same because we're not getting new spells. And another thing is, why the Innervate is more powerful than Preparation is they stack. You cannot go, for example, Preparation into Sprint because they don't spell. You would just, because they don't stack, you would just reduce the mana cost of the second Preparation. And I think this is very important. This is, if you would do any change to Innervate, this has to be the bare minimum, that you can't stack Innervates. I think it is too broken to be able to do things like turn 1 Beta Tide Hydra. Almost no class can deal with that, and you would just win the game, but for what reason? For no reason, just because you drew the double Innervate in your starting hand. The win rate spikes are too huge, just according to draw RNG. So I really like that Preparation just reduces the mana cost of your next spell by 3. This is very important. So on top of it, the Preparation is not getting more powerful because we're not getting new additional powerful spells for Rogue, but on top of it, it is limited in terms of power spikes. In this point of the video, I really want to go back to the problem that came alongside with the power spikes and the increased difficulty in removing minions that come with the new expansions that you can innovate out. Yeah, the answers to it, the counterplay. I've talked about counterplay in so many previous videos, and counterplay is not just a counterattack card like Golakka. I would say this is like one of the worst possible counterplay examples because the swings are just too crazy, and these are like some of the commonly used counterplay cards that got just, I would say, brainlessly nerfed without thinking too much about the consequences. Cards like Execute and Hunter's Mark were too powerful at some points in the past. For example, Hunter's Mark was way too powerful with the Buzzard Unleash combo pre-nerf. But that is like years ago. When you did it on turn 4, you could Buzzard Unleash the Hound's Hunter's Mark, draw cards and clear the opponent's board at the same time at turn 4. And what I don't understand is, at that time, Hunter's Mark was too powerful and it had to be nerfed. And it didn't got nerfed then. Unleash the Hounds got nerfed a couple months later. Buzzard got nerfed a couple months later. Once Hunter became unplayable, Hunter's Mark got nerfed. And right now, in the current state of the game, Hunter is the worst class by far in the game. And now we are suffering because we have cards like Hunter's Mark. Like right now, Hunter's Mark should definitely cost 0 mana just because of how weak Hunter is, or the power level of Hunter. Like Hunter has nothing, right? And the same goes for Execute. Execute was too powerful during the Patron meta. And this is why I really don't understand some of these nerfs. For example, now, Control Warrior, yes, Taunt Warrior is still fairly decent, but compared to the power level of Jade Druid, Execute shouldn't cost 2 mana in my opinion. There were times in the history where Execute definitely should have costed 1 mana, but when it got nerfed, it was way past that time. Like, I think Deathbite rotated out of the game and then Execute got nerfed. Very similar to the Hunter's Mark. Big Game Hunter got nerfed because of Dr. Boom, but then Dr. Boom rotated out of the game. Big Game Hunter also got nerfed that bigger minions see more play, but the classes that lacked hard removal and really required hard removal, like Druid, they didn't get any good replacement for it. We got the Mulch, which had a heavy RNG aspect to it, like very bad cards replay. I don't want to get into that too much, why Mulch is a bad card. Yeah, Mulch essentially replaced the Big Game Hunter. Not every class required the Big Game Hunter, but Druid was definitely one of them that really required a neutral hard removal. And after Big Game Hunter got nerfed, you basically were forced to play Mulch, which is from a competitive standpoint a very bad card that you're forced to run. And now Mulch rotated out of the game, so you essentially have no hard removal. So basically, if you play Druid, even though you play Jade Druid, which is quote-unquote the most powerful deck in the game, if you face Innervate Hydra, for example, how are you supposed to deal with that? Only with your own broken Innervate play. It doesn't make any sense. And with this, I really want to show you the existing problems, and there's way more. I just wanted to touch on a few, and I think you guys can make an own picture from this example. What kind of problems come with printing more powerful minions that you can innovate out, that become harder to remove, and not having equivalent counterplay to it? So what is the conclusion of all of this? Innervate is a big existing problem in the game, but the problem doesn't stop here. It is only becoming more severe and bigger with every upcoming expansion. The expansions will follow a trend of power creeping, just because you have to do it if you want to see people play the new cards instead of the older cards from the previous expansions. So Innervate will only become more and more powerful. It is already unstoppable, so I don't see how Innervate will not get nerfed in the near future, because innovating out a Bitter Tide Hydra or Vicious Fledgling on turn 1 just wins you the game from get-go, or innovating out an Ultimate Infestation around turn 5 also wins you the game. So where do we go from here? It has to be changed. The initial design of Innervate was fine, because it was designed together with cards like Chilvin, Yeti, Boulder Fist, Ogre, Ragnaros, and there was existing counterplay, plenty of existing counterplay during that time. We had, like, you know, cards like Hunter's Mark, Deadly Shot, Big Game Hunter, plenty of counterplay to the minions that got innovated out during that time. But as you guys can see, Innovate is becoming a bigger and bigger problem with every released expansion, and this was definitely not something that was considered a problem when during the time Innervate was designed. But I hope this video was helpful for you guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. And that's it for the second episode of Worst Designed Hearthstone Cards. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a tremendous amount of fun making this video. Like, I really enjoy making this kind of content, and if I help you guys out with this, I'm more than happy to make more of this. If you enjoyed this video, it helps me out a lot if you give it a like and you share it, because I really spent a lot of time making those, and it would help me out a lot. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Stay tuned for that, and peace!